Շարունակում են քննարկումները, ապագա հայկական նախաձեռնության առաջին համաժողովը շարունակվում է, այսօր երկրորդ օրն է եւ հիմա մենք կզրուցենք Ամերիկայի հայկական համագումարի հոգաբարձուների խորհրդի համանախագահ Էնթոնի Բարսամյանի հետ. Good afternoon.
David, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, we are discussing diaspora issues, the problem of diaspora in this century and the future of diaspora. You are very much engaged in diaspora issues and in lobbying issues in DC. Could you please define what is the most important issue right now that you are working on in DC?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to be at this conference, obviously. My congratulations to the organizers who put it together. The Armenian Assembly has been around now for 50 years, actually. So for 50 years, we've been around in Washington. Armenian American organization, non-interference into anything in Armenia, so we don't interfere into internal politics. And what's really remarkable, and I'm glad I'm here, and I'm here to listen. So I'm a guest here, so I can listen to what's happening. But what's important is we make connections all around the world. So what is important in Washington right now is relationships. So the Armenian Assembly has 50 years of making those relationships. And what you have here today are relationships between diaspora and Armenia. So Armenian Americans are here, European Americans are here, South American Armenians are here, Russian Armenians are here. It's really important for people to talk to each other, to have those relationships. So Armenian Assembly of America is an advocacy organization first and foremost, but it's about building relationships.
So you were working very hard on the genocide issue.
Correct.
And after President Biden recognized it, is it today the most important issue, or you change something in your priorities?
Good question. So the issue of the Armenian genocide recognition goes to the heart of the issue that we work on day in and day out, which is security for Armenia. The genocide issue was important only because it demonstrated that there was a historical fact of genocide. It's now been acknowledged by the United States of America, all the branches, both Senate, House, and the executive branch. Now that that's done, it's all about the security of Armenia. So that people in Armenia feel safe, they live safely in Armenia, that's the issue. And so we have a threat right now. We have a threat from Turkey and from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has not moderated its rhetoric. It talks about peace at conferences and then goes right back to aggressive behavior. We highlight in Washington those issues that we understand are important to Armenia's security. That is what we're about.
So we can see right now how works the civil assembly format. This is the first time in Armenia that we can see this format. What do you think? Is it useful for us? Because we don't have a culture of debate.
So what I love about this program is it is allowing people free flow of information to talk to one another in a very civil manner. So this is something that we applaud. The Armenian Assembly wants to see people gathering, discussing issues of importance to their country. Nubar Fan said something that struck with me. This is important for the 5, 6, 7-year-olds, because if we prepare the table today, those children, as they grow up, will have a new model to talk to each other in Armenia. I think that is a very critical point.
Sure, we should start something.
That's right. So everything we do, and one of the things the Armenian Assembly does is the Armenia Tree Project. You plant the tree today, not for yourself, but for generations to follow.
I would like to ask you to come back to your main position that you are working in Washington.
Yes.
I would like to ask you about the relationships with congressmen and congresswomen. How do you work with them? Can you please say something, not detailed, I understand everything, but how you build these relationships? And is it true that Armenian lobby is very powerful in America?
So I appreciate the question. Armenian Americans have worked in Washington for 50, 75 years. What we have done is we've created a voice where we professionally speak to Washington. I'm an advocate. It's an advocacy organization. We are a nonprofit, and it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, The Armenian Assembly works with both parties, but what we do is we build relationships. I'm going back to my first point, but I, like many of our staffers, have worked in Washington. We've worked for congressional offices, so we understand the process. So what I do in Washington is I deliver information to senators, congressmen, the administration, national security, State Department, so that they understand our position very clearly. We have a very cordial relationship with every branch of government. We've known some of these congressmen and women for years. They know us, and it's a very professional relationship. It's different in the United States because you have the right, just like these people, to speak to your members. Many Armenians years past didn't understand the process. Now we very much understand the process, and many, many Armenian Americans are engaged in public life. I like to call what we do public service, because you're really serving the public. There's no, I mean, I don't get paid to do what I do. It is something we do as Armenian Americans out of our love and our passion for Armenia.
What do you think, what is the Armenian diaspora in general? Is it a soft power for Armenia, or in general, how to build right interconnections between country, Armenia as a country, and the diaspora?
Good question. I think that we see this as a partnership. We are American Armenians. We work in our government in the United States. But what happens in Armenia is not, we don't interfere internally, but we have a partnership. So we meet with everyone in government in Armenia, starting with the Prime Minister Pashinyan, right down to the opposition members and opposition parties. So even this year, my co-chairman Van Krikorian and I met with the government. We met with former President Sarkisian, former President Kocharian. We've met with former President Levonder Petrosyan, and we meet with all the people who have served in government. Very active with the ambassador corps, and those who have served as ambassadors to the United States, and the formers, both as U.S. ambassadors and Armenian ambassadors. So our job is to speak with everyone. We also speak to all the political parties. So people ask us, what's the difference between you and other political parties? We're not a political party. We're an advocacy organization. So we have the good judgment to speak to everybody and speak honestly and frankly about how we see the issues.
But what do you think out of your job? Is it possible for Armenian diaspora to define the same goals? Like for Armenia as a country and diaspora as not a country?
So we see it as, you know, my family came to the United States some 100 years ago now. So we have a lot of experience of being Americans. But coming to Armenia and developing a free, democratic, secure Armenia is our goal. So not only does Armenia need to be democratic, even though that, and the United States is very interested. We understand that Armenia is a true democracy and is probably the only real democracy in the region. It's very fragile, so we need the help of Europe, of the United States, and Russia to say, look, Armenia is on a great path. So what we want is the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation, to come back together and to represent Armenia's interests but we will represent our own interests. In Washington, Armenian Americans have it covered. We can represent our own interests. But the powers that have always worked with Armenia, United States, France, and Russia, need to get back on the same page. And that's a very controversial topic right now with what's going on in the world, but I strongly believe that someday soon, those powers need to come back and work on this region. This region right now is in much flux. I don't believe a lot of Azerbaijani citizens, if they left Azerbaijan, would advocate for what their leader does. I certainly will always advocate for the best interests of Armenia, and if the leadership which are responsible, we must advocate for them, and we do.
The last question. Who is the Armenian of the future?
The Armenian of the future are those children that are being born today, that are very young, and I applaud them. I anticipate great things, because what I see of the younger generations in Armenia, I see brilliance, I see talent, and I see people with great commitment to their country, their professions, and their families. That is the Armenia of the future.
Thank you very much for interest.
My pleasure. Thank you, David.
Մենք շարունակում ենք հարցազրույցների շարքը եւ ինչպես տեսնում եք շարունակում է նաեւ համաժողովը։ Հիմա միանանք համաժողովին։